Once upon a time, Venezuela was a dream. In the middle of the 20th century, it stood as the wealthiest nation in Latin America, a country of prosperity, oil and hope. People came from all over the world to live there. Caracas was booming, its skyline rising with ambition, its streets glowing with confidence. The future belonged to Venezuela. But dreams can decay. And sometimes, the fall from heaven begins when no one is looking. This is the story of how the richest country in Latin America became one of the poorest, not through war or natural disaster, but through the slow unraveling of trust, corruption, and power. It begins with oil, black gold, the lifeblood of Venezuela. In the early 20th century, when massive oil reserves were discovered beneath its soil, Venezuela's destiny changed overnight. By the 1950s, it was producing more oil than Saudi Arabia. Wealth flooded in. The government built highways, skyscrapers, and universities. Venezuelans enjoyed one of the highest standards of living in the world. Caracas became known as the Paris of South America. Imported cars filled the streets. The bolivar, Venezuela's currency, was strong, stable, and respected. A single bolivar could buy more than $1. The country hosted European immigrants, Latin American refugees, and business tycoons. But there was a hidden cost to that prosperity dependence. Oil was not just Venezuela's strength, it became its addiction. 90% of the country's exports came from it. The economy stopped diversifying. Farming declined. Industry stagnated. Venezuela began living off oil money, and oil money alone. Then came the 1970s, the decade of dreams. When oil prices skyrocketed after the OPEC embargo, Venezuela suddenly became one of the richest countries on earth. Its GDP per capita rivaled that of the United States. Governments spent freely. They built grand projects, subsidized everything, and promised a life of abundance for everyone. But in the glow of wealth, the seeds of collapse were being planted. Corruption thrived. Politicians siphoned off billions. State oil revenues became the private playground of the powerful. And when the oil boom ended, as all booms do, the dream began to fade. By the 1980s, global oil prices crashed. Venezuela, unprepared and overexposed, fell into debt. Imports dried up. Inflation rose. The country had lived decades as if the good times would never end, and now, reality came knocking. In 1989, the pain exploded into the streets. The Caracazo, a massive wave of protests and riots, left hundreds dead. It was the first sign that the social contract between the people and the state had been broken. And in that chaos, a young military officer named Hugo Chávez began to rise. To many, he represented change, justice, and revolution, a man who could give Venezuela back its dignity. In 1998, he was elected president. At first, Chávez brought hope. He spoke the language of the poor, defied the elites, and promised to use Venezuela's oil wealth for the people. He called it the Bolivarian Revolution. And for a while, it worked. Poverty dropped. Literacy rates rose. The world applauded his social programs. But underneath the surface, the same problem remained, and grew. Venezuela still relied almost entirely on oil. And instead of reforming the system, Chávez centralized it even more. He nationalized industries, scared away investors, and filled the state with loyalists instead of professionals. Oil prices climbed again in the 2000s, masking the cracks. Chávez spent billions on social projects and foreign aid, building his image as the champion of Latin America's left. But when oil prices plunged again in 2014, after his death, the illusion shattered. The country was not built on productivity. It was built on a single volatile resource, and faith that it would never fail. Under Nicolás Maduro, the decline became collapse. Inflation exploded into hyperinflation, reaching levels unseen in modern history. At one point, prices were doubling every few days. A loaf of bread cost millions of bolivars. Money became worthless. People carried stacks of cash to buy a single meal, until even that became impossible. By 2018, Venezuela's inflation rate had surpassed 1,000,000%. Hospitals lost power. Pharmacies ran out of medicine. Supermarkets emptied. The middle class vanished. Millions fled on foot to Colombia, Peru, and beyond, carrying what little they could. Once the richest country in Latin America, Venezuela became one of its largest humanitarian crises. How did this happen? Economists call it the resource curse, when a country so rich in one resource becomes blind to everything else. Easy money breeds corruption. Populism replaces policy. Leaders buy loyalty with subsidies instead of building sustainable growth. But the Venezuelan collapse is more than an economic story. It's a story about human nature, about how prosperity can dull vigilance, how trust in power can replace accountability, and how pride can blind a nation to its own decay. At its core, Venezuela's tragedy is not just about oil or politics. It's about hubris. The belief that wealth could last forever. That generosity could be infinite. That institutions didn't matter. And when the system finally broke, it broke completely. By the early 2020s, the Venezuelan bolivar had lost so much value that the government introduced new versions, each one cutting zeros, pretending to reset the system. First, the Bolivar Fuerte. Then, the Bolivar Soberano. Then, the Bolivar Digital. Each worth less than the last. People turned to dollars, then to cryptocurrencies, then to barter. Anything but the national currency. The world watched a modern country slide into economic medievalism, where bread was more precious than banknotes and hope became a luxury. Yet even in collapse, there is resilience. In recent years, small sparks of recovery have appeared, dollarization has stabilized some prices, entrepreneurs have adapted, and a shadow economy has emerged. Caracas once again has cafes, nightlife, and whispers of revival. But the scars remain. Venezuela's population has been cut by millions. Generations have lost education, savings, and faith. The oil fields that once made it powerful now lie rusted, producing a fraction of what they once did. The fall of Venezuela is not just a warning for Latin America, it's a mirror for the world. Because what destroyed Venezuela was not poverty, but wealth mismanaged, politicized, and worshipped as eternal. Every empire believes its golden age will last forever. Every currency feels unshakable. Every leader believes they can bend the laws of economics to their will. Until the illusion breaks. Venezuela's story is not unique. It's the same story that repeats across history, from Rome's silver to Spain's gold, from Weimar's marks to Zimbabwe's dollars. Money, in the end, is not about metal or paper. It's about trust. And when that trust dies, the collapse begins. Venezuela forgot that lesson. The world should not.